Senator John Neely Kennedy was trying to enjoy a quiet evening at a Hollywood charity fundraiser when actor Marcus Sterling decided to make him the entertainment. Sterling loudly mocked Kennedy's Christian faith, called him a superstitious hillbilly, and encouraged other celebrities to join in ridiculing his beliefs. Kennedy listened patiently to every insult, his face showing no anger or offense. Then he asked one simple question that brought Sterling's entire world crashing down around him. The Beverly Hills Hilton's grand ballroom sparkled under the glow of 1,000 strategically placed lights, each one positioned to catch the gleam of diamond jewelry and designer gowns that collectively represented more wealth than most nations' annual budgets. The November evening had brought together Hollywood's elite for the annual Children's Dreams Foundation Gala, an event that had become as much about displaying star power and social status as it was about raising money for underprivileged youth. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light as they moved through the crowd. Designer dresses rustled against Italian marble floors, and conversations flowed in the carefully modulated tones of people who knew they were being watched and photographed. Marcus Sterling surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of a king holding court at his most successful gathering yet. At 45, the action star remained at the peak of his considerable powers. 6 feet 2 inches of perfectly maintained physique, salt and pepper hair styled to artful perfection, and the kind of commanding presence that had made him one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors for the past decade. His custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo fit him like a second skin, and his Patek Philippe watch caught the light as he gestured while speaking to the assembled crowd of A-list celebrities, studio executives, and wealthy donors who had paid $50,000 per plate to attend his charity event. Sterling had founded the Children's Dreams Foundation 5 years earlier, ostensibly to provide educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth in Los Angeles. The charity had quickly become one of Hollywood's most fashionable causes, attracting support from major studios, celebrity endorsements, and donations from wealthy individuals who wanted to be associated with Sterling's glamorous brand of philanthropy. Tonight's gala was expected to raise over $20 million, cementing Sterling's reputation as not just an entertainer, but a serious humanitarian whose commitment to helping children had earned him respect far beyond the entertainment industry. What the glittering crowd didn't know was that Senator John Neely Kennedy sat quietly at a table near the back of the ballroom, his presence largely unnoticed among the sea of famous faces and industry power players. Kennedy had come to Los Angeles as part of a congressional delegation examining federal funding for youth education programs, and his staff had managed to secure him an invitation to tonight's event as a way of observing how private charitable organizations operated in comparison to government initiatives. Kennedy cut his usual unassuming figure in a simple black tuxedo that had been rented rather than custom-made, his Louisiana accent and modest demeanor making him nearly invisible among the assembled Hollywood elite. He had spent the evening quietly observing the interactions around him, taking mental notes about the conversations he overheard and the casual displays of wealth that seemed to define every aspect of the gathering. What Kennedy's hosts didn't realize was that his presence at the gala wasn't entirely coincidental. For the past 6 months, his office had been quietly investigating irregularities in federal grants awarded to various youth education charities, and Sterling's Children's Dreams Foundation had emerged as a particular focus of concern. Initial inquiries had revealed discrepancies between the organization's reported activities and the actual programs it claimed to operate, along with financial records that suggested significant portions of donated funds were being diverted for purposes that had nothing to do with helping children. Kennedy had come tonight not just to observe Sterling's operation firsthand, but to gather additional evidence for an investigation that was about to expose one of the entertainment industry's most celebrated philanthropists as a sophisticated fraud who had stolen millions of dollars meant for disadvantaged children. As Sterling moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and basking in the adulation of his wealthy supporters, he noticed Kennedy sitting alone at his table, quietly nursing a glass of what appeared to be club soda, rather than the expensive champagne that flowed freely throughout the ballroom. Something about the senator's modest appearance and serious demeanor seemed to irritate Sterling, as if Kennedy's presence represented a challenge to the glamorous atmosphere he had worked so hard to create. Sterling had built his career playing tough, uncompromising characters who solved problems through strength and determination rather than negotiation or compromise. Off-screen, he had cultivated a persona that combined his on-screen toughness with what he considered sophisticated social and political views that positioned him as a thoughtful critic of traditional American values. He was particularly proud of his atheism, which he viewed as evidence of his intellectual superiority over what he saw as the superstitious masses who still clung to outdated religious beliefs. When Sterling spotted Kennedy's simple cross lapel pin, a small symbol of faith that the senator wore to most formal occasions, he saw an opportunity to demonstrate his intellectual sophistication while entertaining his guests with some pointed commentary about the backwards thinking that still plagued American politics. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's sophisticated sound system, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge a special guest we have with us tonight. Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana has joined us this evening, and I think it's fascinating to have someone here who represents such a different perspective on the world." The crowd turned their attention toward Kennedy's table, with several celebrities pulling out their phones to capture what they sensed might be an entertaining moment. Kennedy looked up from his club soda with a polite smile, clearly unsure where Sterling was heading with his introduction, but prepared to respond graciously to whatever followed. Sterling moved closer to Kennedy's table, his movements carrying the kind of theatrical confidence that had served him well in action sequences and dramatic confrontations. "You know, Senator, I've been reading about your positions on various issues, and I have to say, I'm fascinated by your approach to governance. It's refreshing to meet someone who still believes that an invisible man in the sky is going to solve all of America's problems." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, with several celebrities nodding their approval of Sterling's opening salvo. Kennedy's expression remained unchanged, his hands folded calmly in his lap as he prepared to weather whatever storm was about to unfold. Sterling was warming to his theme now, clearly energized by the positive response from his audience. "I mean, it's 2023, and we're still dealing with politicians who think that prayer is a substitute for policy, who believe that fairy tales written thousands of years ago should guide modern legislation. It's almost charming in a primitive sort of way." The laughter grew louder now, with several celebrities openly applauding Sterling's critique of Kennedy's faith. Kennedy sat perfectly still, his face showing no sign of anger or offense, but something in his eyes suggested that he was carefully processing not just Sterling's words, but the broader situation unfolding around him. "Senator Kennedy," Sterling continued, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student, "help me understand something. You're an educated man. I understand you went to some decent schools. So how do you reconcile your belief in ancient superstitions with the demands of governing in the modern world?" Kennedy smiled slightly, his Louisiana drawl unmistakable as he responded with characteristic courtesy. "Well, Mr. Sterling, I appreciate your interest in my faith. It's always been important to me, and it guides how I try to serve the people of Louisiana and the country." Sterling laughed, a sound that carried no warmth but plenty of condescension. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. You actually think there's some cosmic force watching over you, guiding your decisions. It's like believing in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. How do you expect to solve real problems with that kind of thinking?" The crowd was fully engaged now,
with several celebrities openly snickering at Kennedy's expense. Sterling seemed to be feeding off their energy, his performance growing more animated as he sensed the approval of his audience.
I mean, let's be honest here, Sterling continued, his voice rising for dramatic effect. You're a United States senator, someone who's supposed to be making rational decisions based on evidence and logic. But instead, you're basing your votes on the moral teachings of Bronze Age shepherds who thought the earth was flat and women were property. It's embarrassing, frankly. Kennedy nodded thoughtfully, as if seriously considering Sterling's critique. I can understand why you might see it that way, Mr. Sterling. Faith isn't always easy to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. Experienced it? Sterling repeated, his tone suggesting that Kennedy had just admitted to believing in unicorns. Senator, what you've experienced is psychological conditioning reinforced by social pressure and wishful thinking. It's the same kind of magical thinking that leads people to believe in astrology or crystal healing. The actor turned toward his audience, playing to them with the skill that had made him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. This is what we're dealing with in American politics, folks. Superstitious hillbillies who think that praying to their imaginary friend is going to solve complex policy problems. The phrase, superstitious hillbilly, hung in the air like a physical presence, and Kennedy could feel the collective reaction of the crowd, some uncomfortable with Sterling's obvious cruelty, others clearly enjoying the spectacle of a conservative politician being humiliated by one of their entertainment heroes. Kennedy remained motionless for several seconds, his hands still folded in his lap, his expression unchanged. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that the sophisticated sound system had to amplify it for the ballroom to hear clearly. Mr. Sterling, he said, his Louisiana accent somehow more pronounced now, as if he were drawing strength from his roots. I appreciate your perspective on faith and reason. It's always interesting to hear different viewpoints. But since you've brought up the subject of evidence and logic, maybe you could help me with something that's been puzzling me. Sterling's confident expression flickered slightly, though he quickly recovered his composure. Of course, Senator, I'd be happy to help educate you about rational thinking.
Kennedy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, which he studied for a moment before looking up at Sterling with genuine curiosity. I'm wondering if you could explain something about your Children's Dreams Foundation. According to your tax filings, the organization raised $47 million last year. Could you tell me how much of that money actually reached children? The question landed like a physical blow, and Sterling's confident demeanor wavered visibly as he realized that Kennedy wasn't asking a random question, but something much more specific and dangerous. That's not really relevant to our discussion about, Sterling began, but Kennedy gently interrupted him. I think it's very relevant, Mr. Sterling. You've spent the last several minutes questioning my judgment and my fitness to make rational decisions. So I'm curious about your own decision-making process when it comes to managing a charity that's supposed to help disadvantaged children. The ballroom had gone completely quiet now, with guests sensing that something significant was happening, but not yet understanding the full implications of Kennedy's question. Sterling stood frozen, clearly struggling to process what was happening and how to respond. Kennedy consulted his paper again, his tone remaining conversational despite the devastating nature of his words. According to the financial records that the IRS has been reviewing, approximately 11% of the money donated to your foundation last year actually went to programs that served children. The other 89% went to what your accountants classified as administrative expenses.
Sterling's face had gone noticeably pale, though he was trying to maintain his composure in front of the hundreds of witnesses who were now hanging on every word of the exchange.
That's a complicated question, Sterling said weakly. Charitable organizations have various expenses that $4 million for program development consultations that were actually payments to your personal production company, Kennedy continued, his voice never rising, but somehow growing more commanding with each revelation. $6 million for educational outreach that consisted entirely of first-class travel to luxury resorts where no educational programming took place. The implications of Kennedy's words were becoming impossible to ignore, and the crowd of celebrities and wealthy donors who had gathered to celebrate Sterling's philanthropy were beginning to understand that they had just witnessed the exposure of a massive fraud. Kennedy wasn't finished. His final revelation was delivered with the same gentle courtesy that had characterized all of his comments, but its impact was devastating in its simplicity. Mr. Sterling, you called me a superstitious hillbilly for believing in moral principles that guide my decisions. But at least my faith teaches me not to steal from children. What does your rational, evidence-based worldview tell you about taking $42 million that was supposed to help disadvantaged kids and using it to fund your lifestyle instead? The silence that followed was absolute. Sterling stood motionless, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, his face a mask of shock and growing panic as he realized that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. Kennedy folded his paper and returned it to his pocket, his movements calm and deliberate. The FBI will be executing search warrants tomorrow morning, Mr. Sterling. I thought you might want to know, since this is probably the last charity gala you'll be hosting for a while. With that, Kennedy stood up from his table, nodded politely to the stunned crowd, and walked quietly toward the exit, leaving behind him a ballroom full of Hollywood's elite who were just beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what they had witnessed.
The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within hours, video clips of the exchange were circulating across social media platforms, with particular focus on the moment when Sterling's arrogant mockery had crumbled into panic and disbelief. News outlets picked up the story immediately, and by morning, FBI agents were indeed executing search warrants at Sterling's homes and offices. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Sterling's fraud, which extended far beyond what Kennedy had revealed at the gala. Over 5 years, Sterling had stolen nearly $60 million meant for children's education and welfare, using sophisticated accounting techniques to hide the theft while maintaining the lifestyle and public image that had made him one of Hollywood's most celebrated philanthropists. Sterling's career collapsed overnight. Studios canceled his contracts, endorsement deals evaporated, and the entertainment industry that had once celebrated his humanitarian efforts now treated him as a pariah. The man who had mocked entities' faith as primitive superstition was revealed to be a sophisticated criminal who had preyed on society's most vulnerable members. For Kennedy, the incident reinforced his belief that true character had nothing to do with wealth, fame, or intellectual pretensions. Sterling had used his platform and influence to mock traditional values while engaging in behavior that violated the most basic principles of human decency. Sterling eventually pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges related to fraud and tax evasion, receiving a sentence of 15 years in federal prison, and in order to pay full restitution to the children's charities he had defrauded. His fall from grace became a cautionary tale about the dangers of confusing celebrity status with moral authority.
The superstitious hillbilly who had exposed him became a folk hero to millions of Americans who felt that justice had finally been served against someone who had used his privilege and platform to steal from children while mocking the values that actually guided ethical behavior. Kennedy's patient, methodical destruction of Sterling's arrogance became a masterclass in how dignity and preparation could triumph over wealth and celebrity status. The senator had proven that moral principles, even those dismissed as primitive superstitions by Hollywood sophisticates, provided a more reliable guide to ethical behavior than the rational self-interest that had led Sterling to betray the trust of millions of donors and thousands of children. Years later, when asked about the incident, Kennedy would often note that Sterling's mockery of faith had revealed more about the actor's character than it had about religious belief itself. True faith, Kennedy would observe, was measured not by intellectual sophistication, but by how it guided a person's treatment of others, especially those who were most vulnerable and in need of protection. The lesson was clear. In American society, celebrity status and wealth might provide temporary protection from scrutiny, but they could never provide permanent immunity from moral judgment. And sometimes, the person sitting quietly in the corner, dismissed as a superstitious hillbilly by those who considered themselves sophisticated, might be exactly the person with the knowledge and authority to expose the hollowness of their pretensions. If this story of faith, triumphing over arrogance, inspired you, please support our channel with a like and subscription. Every interaction helps us share more tales that remind us of the power of integrity, moral courage, and the strength that comes from staying true to your principles. Let's keep these important conversations alive, one story at a time.